Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Okay, welcome back to our episode, The Gut-Brain Axis, the influence your gut has on your brain. In part one of this episode, I discussed how gut bacteria and your diet influence your memory. Now we're going to discuss mood. And this is indeed nutritional pharmacist Jerry Hickey. I'm the senior scientific officer over here at Invite Health, and thank you for joining me. This is McMaster University up in Canada, and it's a recent study, and it showed that when you gave a probiotic, it improved symptoms of depression. Depression scores improved. So this adds to that whole field of the gut-brain axis. So it's more evidence that this is real. Now, this was back in 2017, May 2017. It's in the journal Gastroenterology, a very good journal, a very good medical journal. It was a pilot study. It was 44 adults with irritable bowel syndrome who also had mild to moderate anxiety and or depression. They were followed for 12 weeks. Half took a daily dose of Bifidobacterium longum, while the other half took a placebo. At 6 weeks, 64% of the patients taking the probiotic had decreased scores on tests for depression, compared to 32% of patients given the placebo. So twice as many of the patients with irritable bowel syndrome, their depression absolutely improved versus those on placebo, which is a fake pill. So they did functional MRIs, and it showed that the improvement in depression scores was connected to changes in multiple brain regions involved with mood control. Now, that's an important finding. And there's a lot to back that up. So here's the University of Leuven in Belgium. And this took place very recently in 2019. And here's what they said. I'm going to read you what they said in their report. Communication involving hormones, the brain, and the immune system is tightly linked with the human gut microbiome. So the human gut microbiome is all the bacteria and microbes living in your digestive tract. So this interacts with our central nervous system. So they go on to say the interaction along these lines is said to be a two-way street, with the gut microbiota, that's the bacteria, playing an active role in processes linked to brain development, brain physiology, which is, the function of the brain, psychology, and your behavior. In fact, there's some studies now showing that children with some behavioral issues, when you give them certain strains of probiotic, they actually behave a little better. So that's very interesting. It might have to do with down-regulating inflammation in the brain. They just feel better. It's just easier for them to sit still and behave. So the researchers at the University of Leuven in Belgium go on to say further investigations extend this role to the regulation of intestinal epithelium and the blood-brain barrier permeability. So, in other words, the bacteria in your intestines keep the lining of the intestines healthy, but they also keep the lining of the blood vessels in the brain healthy. So let's discuss that. The blood-brain barrier is really important. It tends to break down with age. What it is, it's extra insulation in the blood vessels in the brain. The same blood vessels that travel throughout your entire body, to your muscles and your liver and your kidneys, also travel into your brain. So something exiting your blood vessels by your liver, not an issue. But if the same things exited your blood vessels in your brain, it might be really bad. So the brain blood vessels have additional insulation that traps things in the blood vessels, prevents them from getting into the brain unless the brain actually needs them. The brain has these different mechanisms, such as active transport, for cherry picking things out of the blood, bringing it into the brain as the brain needs it. Tight control of that, by the way. So the blood-brain barrier is really essential, and the research is showing that the bacteria in your intestines, now I mentioned this in the first part of part one of this episode, the bacteria in your intestines ferment fibers and good foods, and you create butyrate, and butyrate is involved with healing the intestines, but also healing the blood-brain barrier. So that's really an important finding. So they looked at the bacteria from 1,054 people. These were enrolled in the Flemish Gut Flora Project, and they pooled it with the diagnoses of depression from the doctor. So out of 1,054 people, some were depressed, some weren't. So they looked at the bacteria and they started to compare it. And they looked at a specific group of bacteria that either improved your mood or led to poorer mental health and depression. So that's what they found. So they found consistently that there were certain bacteria depleted among people with depression, whether they took antidepressants or not. So the antidepressants weren't affecting the bacteria, but the bacteria were affecting the depression. Now they looked at an additional 1,063 people from the Dutch Lifeline's DEEP cohort, and also clinically depressed patients at the University Hospitals Leuven in Belgium, and they found the same thing. That having certain bacteria led to depression, while other bacteria improved symptoms of depression. So here's an actual study. It's from July 2020, so it's a very recent study. It's in the British medical journal Nutrition, Prevention and Health, showing that if you give a probiotic with a prebiotic, which is the food for the bacteria, that it can help with symptoms of depression. This is a systematic review and meta-analysis. So let's explain what that is, because it's important to understand that. A systematic review means you go through all of these electronic databases looking for studies of bacteria and depression. And then you pick out the ones that where they're looking at the same findings you want to look at to see if you could prove or disprove the findings. And the studies, if it's done well, you're choosing honest studies that lack bias, that are well performed, well designed, well reported, and that actually means something. So they chose 7 studies, and they found that, hey, probiotic supplements, common probiotic supplements, improve the symptoms of depression. Now, it's a good research institution. First of all, British medical journals are very dependable medical journals. It's called the BMJ Medical Journals. It's Brighton and Sussex Medical School in Brighton in the UK. Now, here's what they said. The authors note that the effect that probiotics have on patients may be twofold. They may directly improve depression in line with the observed findings of their meta-analysis, or what they might do is reduce other comorbidities that affect the brain. But somehow they are reducing symptoms of depression, and that can only be a good thing. So now let's look at stress and anxiety. This is the journal Clinical Nutrition, and they're looking at one of my favorite strains of bacteria, Lactobacillus plantarum. And when they gave people who were stressed out over a 12-week period, when they gave them Lactobacillus plantarum, it was alleviating stress and reducing symptoms of anxiety. Now, this is over 100 participants. But beyond improving the symptoms of stress and anxiety, it was also enhancing memory and cognitive skills. So here's a meta-analysis. It's the University of Queensland, it's Griffith University in Queensland, Australia. It's in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. And they're looking at a number of different studies, including college students. I've read some interesting studies on college students and medical students, how you give them a probiotic and it helps them cope with anxiety and stress and test-taking skills, etc. So the probiotics reduce psychological symptoms, stress, depression, and anxiety. Now, this is another systematic review and meta-analysis, and they're looking at over 7 studies, over 300 participants. So it really meant something. It really meant something. 7 studies, 9 different comparisons. But here's the last one. Very interesting. Because they're looking at people with migraines. People who chronically get migraines are called migraineurs. So there's episodic migraines. An episodic migraine refers to how often, the frequency. So people with episodic migraines, they have migraines up to 14 days a month. Whereas people with chronic migraines have migraines more frequently, over 15 days per month, which is horrible, horrible. So it's the largest trial of its sort ever performed, and they gave a probiotic supplement, 14 different strains of gut-friendly bacteria, and it significantly improved a number of symptoms with migraine headaches. It's in the journal Cephalologia. So after taking 4 billion colony-forming units a day over a 10-week period, the number of migraine attacks in patients with episodic migraines, now that's 14 days a month or less with migraines, was reduced by 40%. And people with chronic migraines, that's over 15 days per month, the number of migraine days was reduced by 45%. But also it affected the intensity of the migraines. And this is all compared to placebo. The probiotic reduced the intensity of the migraines and episodic migraines by 29%. Those are the people who have them 14 days or less per month. And people with chronic migraines reduced it by 31%. So not only did they have fewer days with migraines, but the migraines were milder. That's pretty cool. So there is an absolute level of evidence now that bacteria in the intestines affect the health of the brain. Let me tell you what reduces the number of healthy bacteria. Many drugs, like NSAID drugs like Advil and Aleve and Celebrex and aspirin used for arthritis pain, reduce the number of healthy bacteria. Certain drugs for high blood pressure, certain drugs for diabetes, of course antibiotic drugs, steroid drugs for inflammation like Medrol and prednisone, hormones like estrogen and progesterone. They reduce the number of friendly bacteria. Aging, for some weird reason, reduces the number of friendly bacteria, so it's always important for older people to eat right and take some probiotic supplements. And not all probiotics are the same, by the way. You also want to see colony-forming unit on the label, which means the bacteria are actually alive. You want at least 2 strains and at least 1 billion of each strain if you really want to get some benefit. But what else reduces the number of bacteria that are healthy? Obesity, having a big gut, elevated blood sugar, so prediabetes and diabetes, smoking, alcohol. Also, right now we're doing a lot of cleaning for the coronavirus pandemic. If you're inhaling if you smell the cleaning products you're using, then you're inhaling them. And if they're the industrial ones, like the ammonia and the bleaches and all that, and the Fantastic and all, they actually are killing off your good bacteria. So a lot of people need good bacteria. Now, thank you for tuning into the Invite Health Podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or you could visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe. Please leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And I hope to see you next time on another episode of the Invite Health Podcast. And thank you so much for listening.